I will begin softly, the way a breeze combs through wheat at the end of summer. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a field where each grain tilts its small head and keeps a pocket of sunlight inside its beard. There I lived, an unnamed fox schooled in the smallest sounds of the world, the faint rasp of insects, the wing sigh of birds drifting down, the careful hush of grown-ups who believe the earth will not hear them if they walk on tiptoe. I usually avoided people. In their eyes, a fox is a moving dot, the color of rust, threading the furrows. And yet that afternoon, another sound appeared, not heavy, not hurried, a curious cadence, part tentative, part jubilant, as if its owner were walking inside a private song. I heard him before I saw him. He carried a smell thin and clean material, unstitched from smoke, sweat, oils, and chores more, like cool sand and a memory of stars. I lifted my head from the wheat and watched a small figure with a gold scarf knotted loosely, eyes bright, as if he had broken off a piece of the night sky to bring along. He looked around with no fear and not the slightest intention to hunt or to catalogue. He looked like someone keeping an appointment with a friend. If you told that story the way grown-ups do, it would compress into a label: evening, wheat field, a little boy, and a fox. But I am not a grown-up, at least. Not then, not yet. I had the good fortune to be rescued from the habit of ironing life flat with measures and sums. I did not count the child's height, the acreage of the field, the angle of the sun above the horizon. I listened, and the footsteps had a heartbeat. They did not threaten like a hunter's stride, did not plod like a farmer's, did not scatter like someone lost. They were the steps of a traveler learning how to walk in a new world. What was he to you then, you might ask? A small golden flame that taught my eyes to see in daylight. Creatures like me live by signs. The crack of a rifle means danger, the tang of metal means trap, the stomp of nailed boots means run. The boy carried none of these signs. He stopped at a distance kind enough to let me flee if I wanted. And then he said the sort of sentence that undoes a fox's vigilance. Please be my friend. You will protest. A fox must be cautious. Believe me, I agreed. I answered, not only with words, because foxes speak in gestures, that I was not yet tamed. He did not understand. So I explained in the slow language of late afternoons that to tame is to create ties, to set up invisible threads between two beings until absence tugs and presence glows. If he wanted me as a friend, he would have to come back at the same hour each day, sit in the same place, and let our hearts learn each other by the sound of footsteps in a world full of similar sounds. That is the field's ritual. When I said this, he lifted his chin and grew solemn, the way one becomes when receiving a law freely embraced. Somewhere very far away, on a small planet he later called B612, he had left a rose who made him proud and uncertain in the same breath. In that rose he had already felt the first tug of such threads, but no one had given him a word for it. That is why he came to me, to borrow another language, one that could explain why a flower becomes unique. Even love must begin with naming its practices. I asked him to choose an hour. 3 o'clock, he said. I could not tell why. Perhaps in the worlds of men, 3 is dependable. The school bell, the bakery's warm trays, the mercy of an afternoon break. But I understood the effect at once. Long before 3, happiness would start. Sometimes joy is not the moment of meeting, but the sweet hill you climb toward it. At 10 to 2, the wheat would turn more gold. At 2:30, the wind would discover a tune. By 3, a tremor would quicken the tips of my ears, my sign that my friend was near. Have you felt this? You sit in a cafe and the door's small chime rings the exact note of a familiar arrival. You step into your kitchen and the scent of tea declares a pause. Your phone lights up and your thumb already knows which name will bloom. Repeated simply, kindly, these little rites cut a mild canal through the desert of a day. He sat opposite me, separated by a soft strip of wheat so we could see each other. The first day, we only sat. The second day, he inched closer. I spoke little, mostly by not running. Grown-ups would have laughed at two creatures doing nothing across several afternoons. They would ask, "What's the point?" Yes, grown-ups asked that a lot, but we had a point, a shared tempo, and as you may know, once two hearts find even the faintest agreement in rhythm, words become optional. He heard the husk whisper to me. I heard a seed fall and kiss the dirt. We learned the names of silence. In a certain slant of light, I noticed his hair. It was the yellow that belongs only to ripe grain, the colour that had never been mine. To a fox, wheat is human food, hunter's footprint, sanctuary of escape. Since he arrived, the field began to shine with a private light. I suppose somewhere his rose shone like that in his mind, not for its colour alone, but for the time he had watered into it. Here is the thing grown-ups forget. Uniqueness is not a pre-installed feature, like the number of petals or the price of the vase. Uniqueness is the effect of hours given, care spent, weather endured together, and even the quarrels one dares to reconcile. A sudden gust once bent the whole field. He startled as if I might vanish. I flicked my ears to say, "I'm here." Perhaps he feared something else, the loss of what made his rose the only one. I wanted to tell him, "Do not be afraid. Once a thread exists, wind only makes it sing." I kept quiet. Some truths collapse if spoken too soon. Better to let him discover them himself, just as he would later find a well in the Sahara at night, walking beside a pilot whose broken engine had fallen among dunes. The essential things hide under dry surfaces, but they wait for the patient. You may find this amusing, but between those afternoons of nothing, I changed. Less cold-blooded, more constant. I grew suspicious, less often of shadows that had not yet arrived. We often think taming means reshaping the other to our comfort. I know it is disciplining oneself to wait. When he promised, 3, I learned not to bolt at every rustle at 2:30. When he smiled, I learned not to demand that he always smile. When he kept still, I learned that silence deserves citizenship in friendship. Of course, we still laugh. Once I told him that my life used to be a series of emergency exits. He said his was a long layover between stars. He asked if I hunted chickens. I asked if he tended volcanoes. We both agreed that patience is more difficult than bravery. Bravery is a leap. Patience is a long road. Yet we may still ask whether, in a world timed by alarms and drenched in numbers, grown-ups can return to a ritual as small and saving as sitting down at the same hour, so that a heart might learn a new beat. If that question weighs on you, breathe. Think of some modest habit you keep. Watering a plant before bed, brewing a cup before you open your laptop, sending the text that reads, "Home soon." Invisible ties are braided from such motions. They do not make tomorrow richer in possessions, but different in meaning. Now there is someone, or something, worth waiting for. So I, the fox of the wheat, listened and waited that first evening. It was the day the footsteps of a boy from the stars found a seat in my Chester space that had been empty for a very long time. Whether you live in a tower of glass or on a road lined with dust, I suspect you shelter a similar empty seat. We are only at the threshold of the story. The thread is slender and new, but it shines. From here I will tell you how a boy and a fox twined it loop by loop until both the field and the sky changed colour. He told me he came from a small planet hardly larger than a house, B612 he called it, as if it were both an address and a lullaby. His voice turned steady when he spoke of it, the way a rope grows taut when someone grabs the other end. I had 3 volcanoes, he said, 2 active and 1 extinct. But you never know, so I cleaned them all. In the field, the wheat stood listening like a congregation. I pictured the boy with a rake of reed or a tiny poker, tending craters at dawn as if they were hearths in a cottage. Grown-ups would scoff. Of course, volcanoes are not stoves, and boys do not keep planets orderly with a brush, but I have learned that responsibility wears many costumes, and scale is one of love's disguises. A small planet is still a world if you are the one who wakes it each morning. He spoke of baobabs, too. Like every creature of a field, I know how one unattended seed can become a forest of problems. He described drawing them up by the roots before they split the planet to pieces, the way carelessness splits a friendship into fractures no one can mend. I did this every day, he said, with the plain pride of someone who has learned that daily work is an antidote to calamity. It was then I realized the boy loved routine, not because it binds, but because it frees. When you know what to do at sunrise, you can afford to dream by noon. But it was the rose that changed his voice. He tried to tell it as one tells a riddle whose answer they dread to hear. She arrived from a seed, possibly by accident, possibly by fate. It makes little difference to a heart that has already decided to listen. Her bud took forever, ranges of green guards around a secret. And then one morning she opened. She was so beautiful, he said, and so demanding. Her perfume made him dizzy with devotion. Her thorns made him suspicious that his devotion was a trick. She spoke about tigers, asked for a screen, coughed delicately behind her lies. He watered her anyway, shielded her anyway, listened anyway, but the listening grew complicated. You know how it is. Affection turns into arithmetic. When fear is added, we begin to tally how often she said thank you, how long he waited, which omissions equal betrayal. He became ashamed of his calculations and left. He said it simply, and I did not press him for the scandal of it. Not every departure hides drama. Sometimes we leave because we cannot yet translate what we feel. I should not have gone, he murmured, and the wheat seemed to agree in a long sigh. I could have said, no, you needed to go in order to return, but that would be my story, not his. A fox knows that consolation is sweetest when found, not administered. I asked him instead to tell me what he learned along the way. He passed a series of planets like stations on a railway where the ticket clerk is asleep and the timetable serves only as a suggestion. A king on a bare world who insisted on absolute obedience but was kind enough to order nothing impossible. I order you to yawn, or I command the sun to set at a reasonable hour. Grown-ups would call this satire. I call it the portrait of a need to be obeyed without the burden of wisdom. The boy laughed with sadness in his eyes. He had already obeyed enough senseless winds on his own planet. The breeze of pride, the draught of fear. He recognized the trap. There was also the conceited man who wanted applause forever. a court of one. And the drunkard who drank to forget that he drank. We both paused there. Even a fox understands circular grief. A businessman who counted stars like coins, the way some beings count the hours of their children, as if ownership could protect them from loss. The lamplighter, dutiful beyond reason, lighting and extinguishing a lamp to keep pace with a planet that spun too fast for any calendar. He was the only one who did not seem ridiculous to me, the boy said. He cared for something other than himself. I nodded, because there is a sacredness in tending a flame you did not ignite and will not own. Finally, the geographer, grand and useless, mapping seas he had never seen, mountains he had not climbed, trusting only the reports of others while refusing responsibility for verifying anything. From him, the boy learned the difference between information and intimacy. While he spoke, I considered how easily the world of men becomes a museum of poses, each person polishing their little truth as if it were the whole horizon. Perhaps that is why grown-ups forget how to look at a rose. They are busy curating their exhibits of self. The boy's journey was not a pilgrimage for facts, but for proportion. He was learning how large a small thing can be when it is loved, and how small a large thing becomes when it is hoarded. He told me about arriving on Earth and meeting a snake in the desert who spoke in riddles and promised a return as light as a fallen body. I know snakes. They represent doorways no one else dares to call by their name. He met a flower with 3 petals who was shy, and later a whole garden of roses that looked exactly like his own. Imagine the shock. The heart tends to imagine its beloved as a singular miracle. Then the world repeats the shape 100 times and says, so? He was crushed. If there were many roses, what did his amount to? Here language is both enemy and friend. Unique can be a prison if it is defined by rarity alone. It can be a liberation if it is defined by relationship. That was the day we met, just after the revelation of the garden. He came to me with the ache of someone whose faith has been unthreaded by abundance. He did not yet know that his hours on B612, watering, shielding, listening, and even the irritation at imaginary tigers had woven the very uniqueness he feared he had lost. I did not tell him. Not yet. I asked him to sit, to choose a time, to allow a field to teach him what no planet had the vocabulary to say. When I think of those first tellings, I remember small things, how he folded himself onto the ground, knees up, as if making room for a planet between his arms. How he leaned his head back and looked at the sky as if it were a page he had once memorized and now could not read. How he thanked me after each story as though I had given him something instead of merely listened. Grown-ups exchange information and then bills. Children exchange stories and then gratitude. The wheat kept the minutes. The light thinned. The day turned the color of a promise kept. We broke the heaviness with small jokes. He asked if foxes ever hold grudges. I said we misplace them in the grass, and later, when we find them, they have grown into hedges. He wondered whether volcanoes snore. I said only when no one cleans them. He told me that the lamplighter's planet spun once a minute. I asked whether its residents were the most punctual or the most exhausted in the universe. We laughed and let our laughter do the lifting that reason cannot. Yet we still ask whether a heart can remain steadfast in a universe that offers endless copies of what we love. Does abundance dilute meaning or require from us a stronger vow? If that question knots your brow, allow a simpler thought to smooth it. The coffee mug with the hairline crack that you glue every time, the park bench whose plank pinches, but that you return to because a conversation once began there. The book's so common it lives in every library, but yours is underlined with the weather of your own days. Uniqueness is often the echo of attention. The boy finished his catalogue of planets and deserts and looked at me as if I were a port and he the ship, uncertain of docking. "Will you teach me?" he asked, as if what I had were a curriculum rather than a habit. I almost said yes in the grand way teachers in stories do, but I remembered that taming is not a lesson so much as a schedule kept with tenderness. "Come back tomorrow," I said, "at 3. He smiled as if I had given him a compass. The wind braided a few strands of his hair into the colour of wheat. Somewhere far away, a rose-demanding, perfumed, unreasonably dear must have felt a tug along an invisible string. And I, a fox who had always lived like a rumour tucked into tall grass, began to live like someone expected. There is no greater dignity. The next morning the field woke in bands of colour-pale straw near the earth, green shadows deeper in, and a thin ribbon of sky so clean it almost whistled. I kept to my burrow until the hour we had agreed upon, not because I doubted the boy, but because I needed to learn the discipline of waiting. Foxes know how to wait in the feral sense, the way a body goes still before a pounce. This was different. This was a waiting that did not end in capture, but in recognition. To be tamed is to be recognized on purpose. He arrived with the care of someone entering a sanctuary he had swept himself. He did not rush me, did not speak first. He simply sat where the wheat thinned and placed his hands on his knees as if to keep them from fidgeting. I inched forward. We agreed, without saying so, that the distance between us would shrink by the width of a grass blade each day. Grown-ups would have measured it with a ruler and made a chart. We let the chart write itself in the memory of our nerves. "Tell me again what taming means," he said at last. "It means making ties," I answered. "It means that among the thousands of feet that cross this field, one set of footsteps will sound like a story, and among the thousands of scents, one will open a door." I could tell he wanted to ask for guarantees, the contracts that make grown-ups feel safe. I gave him rituals instead. Come at the same hour, sit in the same place, and leave when the light reaches the third fence post. If a day must be missed, send a Cigna ribbon on the barley, a stone in the path so my heart does not practice panic. He smiled, as if he recognized his own planet in my rules. "I used to clean the volcanoes every day," he said, "even the extinct one." It was wise, I said. What looks asleep may only be waiting for a reason. We practiced our small religion of approach. He would speak of B6 to 12 in measured pieces, as if carrying water in a cup he didn't want to spill. I would tell him about this field where rabbits dig without getting caught by the plough, which hedges are polite and which are rude, how the hunter's boots sound different after rain. On that topic, the boy grew curious. "Do hunters come often?" he asked. "Often enough," I said. "They keep schedules, that is their gift and their blindness. On Thursdays they dance with the village girls, so Thursdays are safe for foxes." He laughed at the idea of a whole species organizing its danger around a dance. "And chickens?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Chickens are the rehearsal of our appetites," I admitted, "but they make life monotonous. A day filled only with chickens is a day measured in feathers." He grinned in complicity, and I felt some barrier of cliché dissolve between us. To become friends is to confess one's small ridiculousnesses on purpose. I told him that taming requires two kinds of clarity: where to meet and how to part. "We will learn good entrances and good exits," I said. He nodded, though the words looked heavier on him than he expected. We softened them with ordinary questions. He asked whether the field ever dreams. I told him the wheat dreams of being bred, the soil dreams of being cool again. I too have my dreams, but they are not always polite. He asked whether foxes fear thunder. I said thunder is only the sky remembering it has a voice. At 3 each afternoon, the field became a theatre where nothing obvious happened and everything essential did. We sat. We advanced a finger's width. We shared the kind of silence that knits, not the kind that separates. And because the body is a faithful servant when given a rhythm, I began to feel the change before I could name it. At 2 o'clock, my ears lifted. At 2:30, my chest loosened. At 3, a warmth moved through me like the first swallow of tea. If he had not come one day, I would have learned sorrow by the clock. Why does the same hour matter so much? He asked on the 4th afternoon. Because expectation is the seedbed of recognition, I said. When the heart anticipates, it prepares a shape into which presence can pour. Without that shape, presence runs off the edges. I could see him, imagining his rose how the hours spent watering and shielding had carved a cup in him. The cup had remained after he left. Emptiness is simply a cup with no one drinking from it. He told me about the garden of roses he had found on earth, how it drained his faith. They looked just like mine, he said, frowning at the wheat as if it had betrayed him. I asked him what he had done for any of those roses. He shrugged. Nothing. Then they are only shapes, I said gently. A rose is a shape until someone gives it hours. He looked relieved and wounded at once. Truth often arrives in that costume. We continued our ritual. I told him a fox's law when to trust a shadow, how to identify a trap by the way the grass around it forgets to move, why a path that is too straight is a liar. He offered stories in exchange, a lamplighter whose duty was nobler than its logic, a businessman who counted stars, a geographer who catalogued what he refused to touch. I think grown-ups like maps because maps lie politely, I said. They pretend we can fold the world. On the 7th day, he brought a tiny screwdriver he used to maintain the engines of his memory, my phrase, not his. It was really the pilot's tool, but he borrowed it as a talisman. It helps me think, he said, turning it between his fingers. I pretended gravity about such mechanics and then asked, do thoughts rattle loose without it? He laughed. Lightness is the oil of understanding. A sudden shower moved across the field, like a curtain being drawn and undrawn. We waited it out under the modest shelter of a willow whose branches made a room just large enough for an honest conversation. What if I never see my rose again? He asked. His voice was not yet the voice of despair, only of someone bargaining with an ache. Then you will have to see her otherwise, I said. Oh, in rules you keep, in patience you practice, in promises you refuse to break even when no one is watching. He considered this. But that is not the same, he said. No, I agreed, it is not the same. It is the thread that refuses to snap simply because distance pulls at it. We fell quiet and listened to the rain argue gently with the leaves. In the pause I remembered my own first taming, long before I learned the discipline to ask for it properly. It had been accidental, an old woman who fed the hens at dawn and dropped crumbs deliberately careless along the wall. I timed my mornings to hers, not to steal, but to listen to the way she hummed. When she died, the wall became a calendar. On it I kept the shape of her song. We are all historic houses of the small people who have lived in us. Do foxes grieve? The boy asked, as if catching the edge of that memory. Quietly, I said. We do not tear at the earth. We keep hours in honor of what the hours once held. We tried to lighten the air. He claimed that on some planets the rain falls upward. I objected that such planets must have very confused umbrellas. He asked if I had ever mistaken a scarecrow for a saint. I said only at dusk, when holiness and straw look related. He wanted to know how many chickens it takes to feel accomplished. I told him none, and he looked as baffled as a banker with no ledger. Accomplishment, I said, is how well you kept the appointment you made with your better self. Yet we still ask whether rituals can save us in a world that has replaced seasons with settings and bells with notifications. Do habits of love survive when time is packed tightly into tasks and attention is the most hunted animal? If such questions make you tired, let them sit. Think instead of a simpler fidelity, setting a chair for a friend who might come, tuning the guitar even on nights you do not play, walking the same route to notice how a neighborhood changes its earrings of light. Every repeated kindness straightens one crooked plank in the bridge between two shores. Near sunset on the 8th day, we rehearsed our parting only as a formality, like sailors practicing lifeboats. When it is time, I said, we will do it without blame. You will leave me the wheat, and I will leave you the rule of 3 o'clock. He swallowed and said nothing. The rehearsals sounded too real. I wanted to tell him the sentence that would become my small legacy, the line people sometimes attribute to saints and sometimes to children. But I sensed it wasn't ripe. Words, like fruit, bruise if you pick them for display. So I kept it in my mouth like a seed. He stood to go, brushed a palm along the wheat, and it shivered with what I could only call gratitude. He promised tomorrow, and tomorrow's tomorrow. As he walked away, the space he left filled not with emptiness, but with a pattern. Holes are also information. They tell you what used to be there, and how quickly it might return. I, who had lived by dodging, now lived by a clock. It felt like dignity stitched to my days, and in the aching sweetness that comes whenever meaning begins to take a definite shape, I understood that taming had already begun. The field knew it. The sky, too, which was a deeper blue than it had any right to be after rain. At 3 o'clock, the world put on its best manners. It was not that anything grand occurred, no trumpets, no miracles, only wheat and wind, and a boy with a scarf that borrowed the sun. But repetition dignifies the ordinary. By the 4th or 5th afternoon, even the sparrows seemed to adjust their gossip to our hour, as if rumour itself had learned to whisper more softly when we met. I sat where the stalks thinned into a small clearing and watched the path he had made with nothing but footsteps. Paths, remember? They are diaries written by souls. He arrived on time, not the punctuality of trains under command, but the punctuality of someone who has learned that kindness is a schedule. He folded himself onto the ground and, after a moment, spoke like one tuning an instrument before a song. "Remind me," he said, "why the same place, the same hour?" "Because the heart trusts what returns," I answered. "The calendar is a net we weave for meaning. If we drop it at the same spot, the river yields more than driftwood." He nodded. He had been drifting. You could see it in the way his attention sometimes sailed too far and then tilted back. Embarrassed to have left the harbour of our silence, we let the water still. I told him about hunters and their Thursdays again, not to frighten him, but to prove that even danger can be negotiated with a ritual. An agreement with time, I said, is a treaty with fear. He did not come empty-handed that day. From his pocket he drew a crumpled drawing. Children's drawings have the bravery of a first draft. It showed a hat-shaped thing. I tilted my head the way animals do when they refuse to pretend. "It's a boa constrictor digesting an elephant," he said, almost defiantly, as if he expected the usual misreading. I smiled without cleverness. "Of course," I said. The relief in him loosened something I hadn't yet named, the fear of being explained into boredom by grown-ups who mistake imagination for error. We made our slow procession toward each other, 2 inches of courage per day, 1 confession per hour. He told me about learning to draw as a very small child and being told to choose careers more compatible with fact. I stopped, he admitted, because no one understood. My whiskers twitched. I have long believed that misunderstanding is not a lack of intelligence, but a lack of willingness to sit still with the unmeasured. "You drew what could not be weighed," I said. "Grown-ups fear scales that won't settle to 0. We laughed to thin the seriousness. He asked whether foxes ever enroll in art school. I said we drop out when the curriculum refuses to admit the color wheat. He wondered if hunters appreciate sculpture. I told him they do, especially statues that stand very still and look suspiciously like foxes. He offered to draw me. I told him my best portrait already lived in the wind. 3 o'clock became not a number, but a door. Long before it opened, light placed a hand on the field. The wheat's gold sharpened, then softened, like a thought being clarified and then forgiven. I learned the ethics of waiting, how not to fidget my tail into frenzy, how to let the body be a bench where expectation could sit without complaint. The boy learned too. He stopped reaching into tomorrow with questions that bruised both hours. We practiced presence until it felt like an honest noun. "Does it hurt?" he asked one afternoon. He meant taming its cost. "Yes," I said, "but the pain is an instrument, not a wound. It tunes you to the pitch of what matters." He considered this, turning it as one studies a star through a small telescope. Surprised that distance can be exact. I taught him the difference between noise and sign. A sudden crack in the brush, noise. The same crack at the same minute each day, sign. When you give hours to someone, I said, their absence becomes legible. He looked toward the horizon, perhaps toward a flower he had tried to read without a legend. "Is that why I miss her more at dawn?" he asked. "Because I used to water her then?" I nodded. Meaning is a habit with a memory. We rehearsed a kindness that would later be needed. How to part without accusation. "We will not blame the road," I said. "Roads do what roads do. We will not call the sky indifferent. Sky is indifferent to everyone and still behaves beautifully." He smiled despite himself. "And we will not declare the hours wasted," I added, "because hours given are never lost. They change their address." He told me about the pilot again, the man of metal and maps who had fallen into sand and had to unlearn a continent of hurry. "We drew water together from a well we found at night," he said. "It tasted like a gift." I pricked my ears. Wells are shy. They prefer to be discovered by thirst rather than by plans. Thirst is a teacher, I said. It sends the curriculum after the student. He looked pleased by the metaphor and then fell quiet, as if tasting salt and memory at once. Grown-ups would say nothing occurred that day which could not be explained by psychology. Attachment theory, ritual, the neurochemistry of expectation, labels like neat shelves. I have nothing against tidy rooms, but no label has ever made wheat glow with the color of a child's hair. Here is what happened. He came when he said he would. I did not run. That is all, and it is everything. On the 6th afternoon, a hawk spooked the field and rushed past us with the suddenness of bad news. The boy started, then steadied. "It's only a hawk," I said, though I kept track of its shadow the way one keeps track of a rumor. He recovered, but his breath told me he was thinking of other departures, faster, more final. "If I go," he said so softly the wheat had to lean in to hear, "will you be sad?" I considered the honest shape of the answer. "Yes," I said. "I will be the colour of the field on a cloudy day." He laughed, not to mock, but to keep the ache from tipping. "Then I shouldn't have tamed you," he whispered, half to himself, trying out an argument that would later be popular among frightened hearts. "Oh," I replied, "you should, because now the wheat will teach me your laughter, and laughter is lighter than grief can ever be heavy." He looked undecided between relief and protest. "Both feelings are citizens of love." We let the air be easy again. He wanted to know whether foxes collect souvenirs. "Only rules and scents," I said. "Paper fades, rituals don't." He asked what I feared most. "Carelessness," I answered. "It unravels threads faster than knives." Then, gentler. "And you?" He said he feared misunderstanding, the kind that leaves you alone in a crowd. "We are already two against that," I said. A quorum. The sun slipped toward its private appointment with the horizon. The hour approached the third fence post. I said, "When you leave, leave me a sign to keep something honest," he thought. "I can't give you the scarf," he said, touching it, "because it keeps my neck from forgetting the wind." "Keep it," I agreed. "Give me the hour." He looked at me with the gratitude of someone whose hands are suddenly not empty after all. Yet we may still ask whether rituals, those humble promises to time, are enough against the big machines that pull our days apart. Can a single hour kept with care resist the factory of forgetting? Do we become sentimental gardeners tending a square of meaning while the wider field is bought and paved? If such doubts crowd you, let them linger at the gate while you try an experiment. Choose one small hour and one small place. Sit there as if you were expected. Bring nothing a market would price highly. Bring attention, a cup, a pencil. Repeat this for a week. See if the world does not begin to meet you halfway, rearranging its light, loaning you a bird, letting a stranger's footsteps become familiar. Savings accounts grow by interest, so does devotion. As we parted that day, we did not yet know how many hours remained. The ignorance was a mercy. He rose, brushed the wheat again, a benediction now, and promised tomorrow. I watched him go until he was absorbed by distance. Then I sat and let the ache arrive on schedule, not as an enemy, but as a messenger. This mattered. The field, which concerns itself only with weather and growth, seemed to agree. It hummed in a register I had never heard before we invented 3 o'clock. I went back to my burrow and slept the sleep of creatures who have spent their daylight well. The night carried its usual freight of stars, and for the first time I understood why sailors give names to lights they will never touch. Naming helps the heart return. By the 9th afternoon, the wheat had learned our names. That is not metaphor. Fields keep records more faithfully than ledgers do. Only their ink is light. When he came, a brightness ran ahead of him as if the day were eager to escort him to our clearing. I had once believed that the world was indifferent, that every minute was welded to the next with the same grey seam. Now I saw how time, humoured by a ritual, will put on gold. He settled cross-legged and watched me as if he were reading a slow book. "Tell me again," he said, "about the ties. Children repeat what they want to become real." I obliged. "A tie," I said, "is an agreement to be changed. It is not a chain, it is a thread. Chains drag, threads teach you to move differently." He looked at his hands, then at the wheat. I could tell he was measuring a change he could not yet name. He spoke of the garden of roses once more, not with despair, but with a puzzled respect, the way one regards a choir when one has promised to sing only one voice. They were all beautiful, he admitted. And yet, he did not finish, because endings are poor tools for beginnings. I finished for him, gently. And yet none of them has your hours. He breathed as if someone had opened a window in his chest. Hours are the currency of uniqueness. That is the only exchange rate that does not fluctuate. To prove the lesson to himself, he suggested an experiment. If I come late, he said, will the field still know me? We tried it the next day at 3:10. The light was confused, like a host who has set an extra plate and is not sure whether to clear it. My ears, which had learned the music of 3 precisely, tried to retune. When he arrived at last, the relief hurt. I'm sorry, he said. I got lost talking to the pilot. I could have snapped something clever about clocks and courtesy, but I remembered that taming is not an audit. Do not apologize to me, I said. Apologize to the hour. We will listen tomorrow with better attention. He grinned, half abashed, and promised. Promises are simply the future spoken aloud. We traded facts that day as children do fact as bead, not as brick. He told me the pilot had drawn him a muzzle for his sheep, with a strap so it wouldn't eat the baobabs by accident. Then he frowned and corrected himself. It was for the rose, to protect her from the sheep should one ever wander so far. I filed this under the category of grown-up solutions, useful drawings for dangers that may never arrive, when often what is needed is a habit for the dangers that already live with us. Guard the hours, I said. She will be safe inside them. A lark rose, scribbling its quick notes against the afternoon. We watched until it vanished into the general blue. Do larks ever get lonely? He asked. Only when they sing without an answer, I said. Loneliness is a call that no one names. He nodded and pressed his palms together as if he were holding something fragile. Perhaps the idea that he, too, wanted an answer from his rose and had gotten only perfume and thorn. I wanted to tell him that some answers are given in a grammar of seasons, not in sentences. Spring rarely explains itself to winter. We lightened the air with nonsense. He asked whether foxes ever attend school. We audit grazing, I said. The syllabus is mostly wind. He wondered if my burrow had an address. Yes, I said. Between the 3rd fence post and whatever comes after. He laughed loudly enough to make the wheat shiver, and I thought, if joy has a tone, I will learn it until a gust can play it back to me. In those days I taught him the practical parts of waiting, the small mechanics of loyalty. Choose a sign for I cannot come, I said, so absence does not teach panic. He chose a ribbon, blue as far-away water, which he would tie to a particular stalk if he had to be elsewhere. The first time I found it fluttering there, my chest tightened anyway, but differently. Panic is a storm that insists you are alone. A ribbon is a message that accepts responsibility for the weather. We all deserve such ribbons and doors, on calendars, in the tone of a friend's voice that says, not today, but still you. He told me, a little shyly, that he had started to dream about the rose without the garden crowding in. In the dream she coughs, he said. And I am not angry at the pretense. I am simply there, adjusting the screen. Dreams try on the clothes of courage before we dare to wear them awake. I told him so, and he blushed the way wheat reddens at the very end of summer. On the 11th afternoon, a cloud stalled above us and polished the light to silver. The world felt held in a pause, like a note the singer sustains because the song asks and breath will allow. He used the pause to practice gratitude. Thank you, he said, for sitting with me, It is fashionable to treat gratitude like a jar of vitamin sown a day for health. But his voice made it a ceremony. I bowed in the small way foxes do. "Thank you," I answered, "for arriving as promised. Ceremony returns dignity to the common." He asked if I had ever been tamed before. I told him the story of the old woman who fed hens at dawn, how I timed my life to her humming, how the wall afterward became a calendar that refused to forget. "And now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "I am learning the advanced course." He smiled without quite understanding and let the wheat explain it to him by changing colour, a shade deeper where his shadow fell. We spoke again of responsibility. I did not use the famous sentence people have since put on tea towels because sentences, once famous, grow brittle at the edges. I said it differently. When you invite a thread into your life, you must protect it from knives and from your own impatience. You must decide every day to keep it from tangling around the wrong things. He listened harder, as one does when a rule may soon be tested. I feared the test would come sooner than we wanted. The pilot's engine had grown less broken. Messages had started to flicker across the boy's face, like birds that cannot find the right branch. We eased the foreboding with small curiosities. He asked whether the field had a favourite season. "Harvest," I said, "because meaning becomes visible." He asked whether I believed in fate. "Only in hindsight," I said. "Beforehand we call it choices." He asked what I would do when he left. I pretended to ponder and then said, "I will learn to hear your laughter in the wheat, and then I will teach it to the wind." He grinned, which felt like an advance on a future debt. Yet we still ask whether love can survive translation from presence into memory, from two bodies into one ritual kept alone. When the person leaves, does the hour remain alive, or does it become a museum exhibit, polished and lonely? If this doubt sits beside you like an uninvited guest, offer it tea and let it talk. Then try a small counterproof. Keep one promise to the absent. Open the book you used to read together and read a page aloud. Brew the cup you would have shared and drink it by the window you both liked. Tell the hour you have not dismissed it. See if the room does not shift slightly toward the shape of companionship. Near sunset, he produced a new drawing, a box, he said, with a sheep inside. I could not see the sheep, of course, but I understood the friendliness of a box that protects what you cannot otherwise keep. He was learning the art of indirect care. Perhaps the sheep was really his fear. Perhaps the box was a ritual. We did not dissect it. We let the metaphor graze. He rose to go and hesitated, as if parting itself had become a character in our story we needed to greet politely. "Tomorrow," he asked. "Tomorrow," I said, and then added, "if the ribbon is not on the stalk." He nodded, half smiling. His scarf flicked the air with a flourish that felt like a signature. Then he walked away through the corridor his own feet had written, and the corridor closed behind him the way pages fall together when a book is confident you will return. I sat alone and listened to the field inventory the day. It counted in light. It marked our experiment with lateness, the lark's high scribble, the ribbon's proof against panic, the laughter that could be taught to weather. I realized then that I had acquired not possession, never that, but a vocation. To remember him properly would be a kind of work. Dignified, simple, exacting. The kind of work worth doing, 3 o'clock. On the 12th afternoon, the air had the hush that comes before saying something important and the kindness that comes after. The boy arrived early, then pretended he hadn't, the way one lingers within earshot of a door one is not ready to knock on. I pretended not to notice and kept my eyes on the wheat. Rituals spare us from staring too directly at the center of what hurts. He sat, steadying his scarf with one hand as if it were a thought that kept trying to fly away. We had reached that stretch of taming when the ordinary begins to confess its secrets. A beetle crossed a bare patch of earth and left a calligraphy so delicate the sun leaned down to read it. The boy watched and smiled. "It's writing," he said. "Of course," I answered. "The field has always been literate. We were the ones who needed school." He laughed, and the laugh drew a brighter gold from the wheat as if colour itself were a shy animal that comes closer when you are kind. He told me he missed sunsets on his planet. "One evening I watched 44, he said, with a mischief that barely covered a bruise. All I had to do was pull my chair a few steps. Grown-ups would turn this into astronomy or into a cautionary tale about relativity. I heard instead a devotion. If you love something that changes quickly, you keep company with its changes. What made you watch so many?" I asked. He shrugged. "When you are sad, you love proof that endings can be beautiful." The wheat, being wise, kept quiet. We traded practical law again, as if making rope from alternating strands. I showed him how to test the wind with 3 whiskers and a still shoulder. He showed me how to turn a worry into a task. The way he had once cleaned his volcanoes, even the extinct one, because extinction can be a rumor. "Busy hands keep fear from writing too many letters," he said. I tilted my head at the metaphor. "True," I answered, "but fear will find a pencil anyway. That is why we also need hours, not only chores." He nodded and set the screwdriver he had borrowed from the pilot beside him in the dust, as if staking a claim on steadiness. We let air into our seriousness by being ridiculous on purpose. He asked whether foxes own umbrellas. I said only when we need to be mistaken for gentlemen. He wondered if wheat grows jealous of hair. I said, hair envies wheat because wheat becomes bread. He declared that if he had a bakery, he would sell daylight by the slice. It would go stale, I warned. Then I'd toast it, he said, triumphant. The field applauded by moving all at once. That day he brought a small glass globe from his pocket, smudged with travel. For her, he said, meaning the rose. I knew it at once. The bell jar to shelter a delicate pride from draughts real and imagined. He confessed that sometimes her coughing sounded like theatre, sometimes like weather. I could not tell which, he said. I was angry at not knowing. The honesty put a clean edge on the afternoon. Ignorance, I said, is a draught we blame on the window until we learn to build a wall with softer hands. He turned the globe in the sun. A ring of light circled us like a quiet promise. He tested our hour by not speaking for half of it. Silence is a language, if two agree to listen. In it, I thought of what I owed him. The sentence I had been carrying like a seed under my tongue. Not yet, I told myself. Fruit spoils when picked to impress. But I could give him something adjacent, a thing he would later pick up and say, so this is what you meant. I told him the story of the old woman again, how her singing at dawn had made a ribbon of time I could hold, even when her door no longer opened. What did you keep? He asked after she was gone. The hour, I said, and the tone of her humming. It taught the wind how to be kind to me. He laid his palm on the soil like someone greeting a grave and a cradle simultaneously. He spoke of the pilot in the Sahara, how they had found a well at night and how the water tasted like a gift. I told him gifts are the part of necessity that remembers to bow. And the snake? I asked softly, because I could hear a low rattle of fate in the long grass of his stories. He nodded, wary. He said he could send me back. His venom is quick. We both looked at the line where land becomes sky. Some doors, I said, should have better doormen. We turned our attention to small things to keep the large from swallowing us whole. He combed a few grains of sand into little constellations and named them: the cup, the volcano, the ribbon. I corrected his astronomy with an authority I did not have. "You forgot the fence post," I said. He grinned and added it. "Naming, I have learned, is rehearsal for remembering." "Would you recognize me if I came at noon?" he asked suddenly, testing the theory of ties. "Yes," I said, "but it would hurt. My heart has tuned itself to 3. Noon would be a wrong note." He winced, as if he had already struck it. "Then I will come at 3, he said, and the promise warmed the air between us like tea inside a clay cup. We rehearsed parting the way sailors practice knots they hope never to need. "When it is time," I said, "we will not say never. We will say always, and let the wheat translate." He frowned. "How can the wheat translate?" "By becoming your laughter to me," I answered, "and my waiting to you." He did not say he understood. He only moved closer by the width of one grass blade, the day's allowance, and that was comprehension enough. Grown-ups would insist on inventory. What exactly did we teach each other? How do you measure the return on so many quiet afternoons? But pears ripen because they are left alone long enough on a windowsill. No ledger captures readiness. If you must have an entry for that day, right, we trusted 3 o'clock until it became a doorway no storm could blow shut. As the light tilted, he asked a question whose echo has a long echo. "If I leave," he said, "will the ties hurt you more than they help?" He meant, would it be kinder never to have met? This is the arithmetic of frightened love, and its sums are always wrong. "The wheat was nothing to me," I replied, "before you. It was merely food I do not eat and shelter I borrow. Now it will be music. Will music hurt me?" He considered. "Sometimes," he said, and then smiled with a brave child's wisdom. "But I think I would rather be the kind of creature that hears it." We let the world loosen with a few more nonsense stitches. He asked whether foxes prefer fences or the idea of fences. "The idea," I said. "Ideas do not scrape." He wondered if my burrow had stairs. "Only when the earth feels ceremonial," I said. He promised to bring me a pebble from the well to keep beside my door, so you remember that water is patient. "I have a field to remind me," I said. "But yes, bring it. It is good to have both a chorus and a soloist sing the same truth. Yet we still ask whether meaning can be kept in absentia, whether the ritual of an hour can outlast the body it was braided around. Are we fooling ourselves with pretty ceremonies like children pouring tea for guests made of air? If the doubt tastes bitter, sweeten it with an experiment small enough to succeed. Choose someone you love, present or gone, and dedicate a humble practice to them. Water the plant they would have liked. Keep their favorite chair dusted. Step outside at the time they used to call. Repeat it enough that the hour learns your name. Then notice grief becomes less a hole and more a door left open for a visitor who is not finished with you yet. When at last he rose to leave, he reached as if to take my paw and then remembered that protocols differ between planets and species. We nodded instead, a bow of equals who had chosen their thread. He looked at the wheat as if it were a mirror that had finally decided to be honest. "Tomorrow?" he asked. Tomorrow, I said. The word felt like a slender bridge that could hold us both. He walked away, and the corridor his feet had written closed softly behind him. In the quiet that followed, I felt the ache arrive on time, an ache that behaved itself, queued up politely, and waited its turn. I realized then that sorrow, when trained by love, is not a storm, but a season. It passes, and it plants. Night came. The field put on its jewelry of crickets. I slept with my nose in the wheat and dreamed of a bell jar that glowed like a moon, of a chair scraping 2 steps west to catch another sunset, of a ribbon that did not snap when wind pulled at it. In the dream, the hour of 3 o'clock turned into a door and swung open without a sound. By the 13th afternoon, the wheat had grown a new habit. It leaned first in the direction he would come from, as if even plants could learn anticipation. I set myself earlier than usual, not to hurry him, but to practice the kind of waiting that makes room rather than pressure. When he arrived, he did not sit at once. He paced the edge of our clearing, drawing a circle with his footsteps like someone trying to summon a courage that prefers geometry. I watched without correcting. Taming is not a syllabus. It is a patient garden. He began with small talk as creatures do when the large thing they carry has teeth. The pilot and I found another bolt that didn't belong where it was, he said, sounding proud and worried in one breath. He says the engine may run soon. The word run did not feel like celebration inside my chest. It felt like a door, remembering that it is a door. Engines love their noise, I said lightly, but some departures hum before they happen. He nodded and sat, the way one obeys a gentle gravity. We returned to our lesson in signs. He told me about meeting a railway switchman who explained how trains carry people in circles, because no one knows what they are chasing. Only the children press their noses to the glass, he said, a smile almost forming. They know they are going to see something. I confessed that I too love windows for their honesty. They show you the world and your face in it at once. He described a merchant who sold pills to quench thirst. You save 53 minutes a week. And we laughed, though an ache threaded the laughter. What will you do with your saved minutes? I asked. I would walk to a well, he answered, and the field seemed to approve by lifting all its blades at once. We practiced silence with intent. The difference between an uneasy quiet and a full one is who is trusted to speak first when speech returns. In our quiet yin, a grasshopper rehearsed its hymn, and a distant dog explained to another dog that borders are stories humans tell and animals politely ignore. The boy's breathing found the rhythm our hour had been teaching it. Slower, kinder, more exact. I thought of my own first taming long ago, the old woman's dawn, humming, and how it had made a narrow street into a procession. Some hours are so well kept they make architecture. He brought a question, then set it beside us like a basket he was not sure how to open. If I promise to come every day, he said, does the promise become a cage? He was speaking to 3 audiences at once, to me, to his rose, to his fear. Only if you call it one, I said. A promise is a doorway that opens because you have decided to arrive. Cages close by themselves. He studied his hands. And if I fail? Then we repair, I said. Rituals break gently when handled with truth. To thin the solemnity, we played a game of absurd measurements. He asked how many grains of wheat are required for happiness. Exactly 1 handful less than greed, I said. He asked how far 3 o'clock travels in an hour. As far as kindness can walk, I replied. He accused me of being unhelpful in a poetic way, and I accepted the charge with pride. Some truths need their edges sanded before they fit in the hand. We spoke again of the rose. The bell jar he had carried the day before sat between us, catching light. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "I wonder if the jar was for her or for me." I could hear the draft of honesty entering a room that had been closed too long. "Perhaps it was for your fear," I said. "And fear is grateful for a lid." He held the glass up to the sun. It threw a ring on the ground like a wedding that had decided to be modest. "I left without asking her what she meant," he whispered. I kept facts and missed meanings. I thought of the geographer with his unwalked maps and felt a soft, strict pity for the species that can confuse inventory with intimacy. He asked me to tell him again what taming requires. I repeated the laws we had learned together: the hour, the place, the sign if absent, the refusal to blame weather for our carelessness. The promise to part without making the road the villain. "And one more thing," I added, "a gift when the lesson is over." He tilted his head. "What gift?" I rolled the seed under my tongue and did not spill it. "A sentence you will carry when there are no more hours," I said, "but not today." He accepted this with the obedience of someone who has learned that ripeness is not negotiable. We rehearsed endings again, not to be morbid, but to save ourselves later from cruelty. "When the engine works," I said, "you will be drawn toward it." He studied a beetle the way a child studies an oracle. "And you?" he asked. "I will be drawn toward the hour," I said, and the answer seemed fair to both of us. Grown-ups worship symmetry where life offers only proportion. We would take proportion. The wind came up for a moment and brought with it a scent that did not belong, metal warmed by sun, the ghost of oil. The pilot had tested something. The boy smelled it too and closed his eyes. "Does taming always make goodbyes harder?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And better." He waited for me to soften it, but the truth held. "Harder because loss gains edges," I said. "Better because love gains memory. We let humor keep us from drowning in exactness." He asked whether foxes ever sue the wind for negligence. "Only when it forgets to carry laughter properly," I said. He proposed inventing a scarf for hearts, something to keep them from catching cold when people leave. "We already have one," I told him. "Ours." He conceded with a grin, then suggested I wear mine with more style. "I'll teach the wheat to tie it like a bow," I said, and he clapped as if we had solved something grander than grief. He told me another small story about the pilot, fixing leaks with patience, sleeping little, drawing a sheep in a box when drawing the sheep itself proved too vulnerable to correction. "He is learning," the boy said, a private pride showing. I liked the pilot for this. He was willing to look foolish on the way to being kind. That is a skill adults misplace. Then wonder why the world grows less merciful. "Would you come with me?" the boy asked suddenly, "if you could. Foxes do not travel well by engine. Our maps are stitched to scent and hour, not to altitude and fuel." "No," I said, "but I can go as far as the third fence post and as long as the hour, and that is farther and longer than it used to be." He accepted the answer the way a sail accepts wind, with a shiver that looks like agreement. Yet we still ask whether it is wise to let ourselves be altered by love we cannot keep in the form we prefer. Is it folly to invest hours in a thread that will be pulled away by necessity, distance, or time? Would it not be safer to remain untamed and therefore unhurt an island whose maps need only one color? If that question plants itself in you like a weed, try not to pull it by force. Give it a pot and see what it becomes. Then, as a counterbalance, notice how your days behave when nothing and no one has a claim on them. freedom without ties can begin to resemble drift. On the other hand, a single kept appointment, the way the sun keeps its, can turn a day from a blank ledger into a poem with a refrain. We are not made to be cages, we are made to be doorways. The risk is not pain, but meaning. As the hour rounded toward its closing, he reached into his pocket and produced a pebble. "From the well," he said. "For your door." He placed it by my paw. It was the color of dusk and the weight of a promise kept. I pressed my nose to it and smelled night, metal, and the faint sweetness of water drawn by tired arms. "Now your burrow has a small moon," he said. I told him moons are best when borrowed. Ownership makes them lonely. He stood, dusted his knees, and glanced toward the far line where a thin smoke suggested the pilot's persistence. "Tomorrow?" he asked, and the words sounded both eager and endangered. "Tomorrow," I answered with the steadiness of a bell. He left along the corridor. His steps had taught the wheat to expect. When the field closed behind him, it did so kindly, like a book that trusts the reader will return after supper. I stayed a while, practicing the sentence I would soon give him, tasting it against my teeth to check for sharpness. Language must be filed smooth if it is to be held often. The sky dimmed by delicate degrees, crickets took up their silver needles and began sewing night to the edges of the field. I looked at the pebble and understood. Even small things can guard a door when they are placed there by the right hand. By the 14th afternoon, the sky had a polished look, as if someone had taken a soft cloth to the blue. A breeze braided itself through the wheat and made the whole field nod in patient agreement. I felt the hour arrive before I saw him. Readiness has a temperature. He came with his usual careful stride and the scarf that had taught the light a new trick. But there was a crease between his eyebrows that had not been there the day before, the mark a thought leaves when it has slept badly. "We may be close to the end of our hour's schooling," I said, not to hasten anything but to honor the syllabus time had written for us. He sat, fingers opening and closing on his knees as if testing a hinge. "How do you know?" he asked. "Because the questions have become simple," I answered. "Only endings make us ask simply." I had kept something for this day, the little assignment that would let the field grade our work. "Go to the garden again," I told him. He flinched, then steadied. "Stand among the other roses, the ones that look like yours. Look at them as a stranger. Then look again, as someone who has sat here at 3 for many days and has given hours to a single flower on B612. Do not count petals, do not measure color. Ask your heart what it recognizes." He drew a small breath, like a swimmer tasting the water's first coolness. "And then?" "Then come back," I said. "We will see whether the hour has taught you to read what eyes alone cannot." He rose without complaint. I watched him go, the wheat parting reluctantly, then closing like a book that trusts in the reader's return. Waiting began. Waiting is not idleness. It is the most honest work I know. I remained in our clearing and let the body keep the appointment with absence. At 2:15 the field flickered with an almost laughter and then corrected itself. Not yet. At 2:40 a lark rehearsed a line that sounded too much like good news. I refused to take the bait. A fox learns to tell rumor from sign. I tested the wind with 3 whiskers. It tasted of dust and a distant, clean metal, the pilot's persistence. To keep the ache from turning bossy, I busied myself with the humble arithmetic of the place. How many steps from the willow to the 3rd fence post? Enough to think a thought all the way through. How many stalks in our clearing, sufficient for privacy? How many rituals between strangers and friends? As many as it takes to teach the heart which footsteps mean us. Grown-ups would have wanted numbers. I had only sufficiency, which is a softer but more accurate science. I also indulged in a little nonsense for ballast. I asked a grasshopper if he preferred sunrise or taxis. He chose sunrise and then hid out of embarrassment at having understood the question. I told the breeze it should consider a second job as a violin teacher. It answered by tuning the wheat. When the boy returned, the crease was gone from his brow, replaced by something stern and tender like a vow that has just discovered its own grammar. He did not sit right away. He stood with his palms open as if to show me they were empty of every excuse he had once carried. "You were right," he said, and looked almost angry at the sighs of relief that followed. "They are beautiful, yes, but they are not my rose." The sentence landed between us without boast or apology, a simple fact that rearranged the light. "Because of ours," I prompted gently. "Because of ours," he repeated, as if the phrase were a key he had finally dared to turn. He told me what he had said to the rose show. He had admitted they were lovely, but ordinary to him, that he had not watered them, shielded them, listened to their quiet vanity, or forgiven their theatre. They listened politely, he said, a little amazed. "Roses are proud," I observed, "but they understand math done with time." He smiled then, the smile that made the wheat memorize frequencies. I felt responsible, he added, trying the word on as if it might pinch. Responsible for what I have tamed. We let the sentence breathe. Famous words become brittle if handled without silence. "Responsibility," I said after a moment, "is not a chain, it is a direction. It tells your feet where to go when there is more than one good road." He nodded. I could see him picturing a chair dragged a few steps west to catch a 45th sunset, the small labor love asks that turns sadness into beauty you can keep company with. To keep us from drowning in solemnity, we held our usual festival of ridiculousness. He declared he had tried to compliment the whole rose garden at once and pulled a muscle in his sincerity. I prescribed 2 days of light conversation and a diet of metaphors. He asked whether foxes ever open flower shops. "Only at night," I said. "We sell moonlight and patience by the stem." He laughed, and the field learned another note of his joy. "Will you give me the gift now?" he asked, after the air had been sweetened. He meant the sentence I had promised, the one I had rolled smooth under my tongue. The hour had ripened. The engine on the horizon had stopped smelling like theory. Gifts should not be delayed when their moment knocks. "Yes," I said. "But first, forgive me." He blinked. "For what?" "For making you love me enough that leaving will hurt." He started to protest. Children are idealists about painless blessings, but the protest died. He had already learned that weight can be proof of value. I drew closer, by the width of a grass blade, the closest yet, until his gold hair made the wheat look like a choir wearing the right vestments at last. "This is my secret," I said, the word secret not as a boast, but as a humility, because some truths can only be handed, not broadcast. It is only with the heart that one sees clearly. What is essential is invisible to the eyes. He looked at me the way thirsty creatures look at a well in shade. He did not clap or gasp. He did what the wise do with water. He drank. We let the sentence settle into the field. It arranged itself on everything. The beetle's script, the lark's comma in the air, The willow's room for honest conversation. The pebble by my door that smelled of drawn water. It explains the garden, he said, and the rose. And the hour, I added. And your pilot, he completed, surprising himself. Yes, I said. He drew a sheep in a box because you needed to care for something you could not see yet. He grew quiet the way day does when it decides to become evening. I will have to go soon, he said, no drama, only accuracy. The wind brought the faintest suggestion of oiled metal again, like a signature in the air. I know, I answered. Come tomorrow. He swallowed. And the day after? Come as long as there are days, I said, and we both heard the double meaning behave itself. We rehearsed our parting one more time, closer now to use than to theory. When you go, I told him, leave me the wheat. It will keep your laughter and return it with interest whenever wind has business here. He asked what he could carry from me. Carry the hour, I said, and the rule. Choose a time, choose a place, and keep it faithfully for whatever you love. It will make the world legible. He nodded, a little fierce now, the way one nods when a rule has chosen you. Yet we still ask whether seeing with the heart is practical in a world crowded with dashboards, metrics and graphs. Will a vow to keep an hour or tend a flower hold its own against schedules that measure worth in speed and volume? Are we simply romantic animals with good anecdotes? If that skepticism visits, ask it to join us for an experiment that costs nothing. For 1 week, interpret one ordinary thing by the hours you have given it rather than by its market price or public ranking. A mug repaired twice, a bench that knows your back, a street that has heard your steps enough to learn your mood. Notice what becomes beautiful. Notice what becomes yours. We closed the day with our small comedy of etiquette. He asked if he should bow or scratch behind my ears. Bow, I said gravely. The wheat is watching. It approves of ceremony. He bowed. I returned the honor in the style of my people ears alert, eyes lowered, tail still. Then he touched the pebble by my door and smiled, as if to bless the moon I'd been lent. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, I promised, and the promise did not tremble. He left through the corridor. His feet had taught the field to expect. The light thinned the way paper does when you hold it up to the sun. I lay down and let the ache arrive on time, tame as sorrow can be when it has been taught manners. Somewhere far off, the pilot tightened a bolt and looked at the sky for permission. The sky being itself offered only beauty. It would have to be enough. For now, it was. Morning arrived with the plain honesty of bread. The field was quiet in the way places are quiet when they are listening for a verdict. I felt the hour approach like a tide that had learned our names. The boy came, slower than usual, as if each step negotiated with something invisible that did not want to be left behind. He sat, but he did not fold himself quickly. He looked at his hands as though they had been asked to sign a document they could not read. The engine is almost ready, he said. He did not try to make the sentence cheerful. He let it be a fact among other facts, like weather. The wind brought me a faint echo of oil and metal from the pilot's camper smell that had been theory yesterday, now becoming schedule. We did not reach for speeches. Instead, we refreshed the ritual that had carried us this far. He touched the pebble from the well, placed beside my door, and nodded to it as to a kindly custodian. I tested the air with 3 whiskers and a still shoulder. The wheat leaned in the direction he had come from, then stood straighter, as if performing posture for the last day of school. I went to the garden, he said after a while. I told them they were not my rose. His voice did not brag. It kept company with a new kind of tenderness, stern like a lighthouse. And I told them why, he added, almost shy, because of the hours. Good, I said, and the word did not seem small. It was the entire field agreeing. Now, I continued, we have a lesson left. He glanced up sharply. It is in the nature of endings to hide one more chapter. How to say goodbye, I said gently. He looked like someone conferring with a star. Is there a right way? He asked. There is a kinder way, I said. We will try for that. We rehearsed our kindnesses. We would not make the road the villain. We would not accuse the sky of indifference. We would not count our hours as wasted because they had been given. We will let the hour continue, I said, even if one of us must keep it alone. Will it work? He asked. It will sing, I answered, and singing counts as work. To keep the air from tightening too much around our ribs. We borrowed our old strategy of silliness. He asked whether foxes issue official receipts for friendships returned. I said only if the Treasury requests an audit. He proposed we invent a passport that allows memories to cross borders without queuing. I informed him that the wheat had already stamped his laughter with an all-access visa. We smiled, and the smile did its small labor against the larger ache. Then we let sadness into the clearing. Not to flood it, but to sit like a dignitary and be honored. If I cry, he said, will it mean I failed at being brave? No, I told him down. It will mean you succeeded at being changed. He frowned a little, wanting bravery to look cleaner. But it will hurt you, he said. The concern was for me now. The hour had done its work. Yes, I agreed, and it will make the wheat golden with a meaning it never had. Before you, wheat was weather. After you, it will be a choir. That is not harm, it is harvest. He studied the field as one studies a map that has finally learned to be accurate. Then I should not have tamed you, he said softly, testing the protective logic. All frightened hearts try at least once. I shook my head. Oh, you should, I said, because now the world contains your laughter in places you are not. That is a fair trade. He breathed in, and the breath had the weight of a vow. Responsible, he said, returning to the word we had turned over together like a stone that hides coolness underneath. I am responsible for my rose. For what you have tamed, I corrected, not to scold, but to widen. He repeated it slowly, the way one copies a spell. I am responsible, forever, for what I have tamed. The sentence stood between us and rang gently in the wheat. If you have seen it printed on cups and stitched into pillows, forgive the cups and the pillows. Some words ask to be carried in many households. We sat in a silence that deserved capital letters. Far away, a lark tested a line that sounded like hope, and then, thinking better of it, transposed it into something humbler. The pilot's camp sent up a brief cough of smoke and then none at all. Readiness had exchanged places with waiting. Will you be angry? He asked after a time. If I choose to go? Anger is a blunt instrument, I said. It is for breaking, not for remembering. I prefer tools that preserve shape. He looked relieved. Besides, I added, I asked to be tamed. Consent is a door that stays open even when someone has left. We moved closer by the width of the final grass blade. It felt like arriving at a border that had been kind all along, but still asked to see your documents. I have a gift for you, he said suddenly, and then laughed at his own seriousness. He unknotted his scarf, for an instant only, to let the wind smell like him, and then knotted it back. I cannot give you this, he said, or I will forget the wind. Keep it, I answered. You will need reminders where the sky is busy, he thought, and then gave me something better than scarves and pebbles. I will keep 3 o'clock, he said, wherever I am. He said it the way captains swear to stars. We stood, which is a ceremony in itself when you have sat so many afternoons. He touched the pebble by my door. I placed a paw over the ring of sunlight the bell jar made when the sun struck it just right, as if to bless both water and shelter, both weather and pride. We were ridiculous and sacred in equal measure. Say the secret once more, he asked, not because he had forgotten, but because some truths like to be spoken into air, so they can settle on things. I repeated it, and it did what good words do. It turned the ordinary into a shrine without changing its furniture. He closed his eyes while I spoke, as if to see it better. There was at last nothing left to postpone. The hour walked toward its edge with the calm of someone who has paid all debts. We looked at each other, and I permitted myself what wild creatures rarely allow. I leaned in and let my head rest against his knee. He placed his hand between my ears and did not pet like a master or poke like a child. He kept it there like a seal. The moment was unphotographable and therefore true. I will cry, I warned him. You should know that. I will too, he said. Good, I replied, because mutual tears are a treaty. We parted. There is no choreography for it. He turned toward the line where the pilot waited with his mended noise. I turned toward the field that had enrolled me in its golden choir. We took 3 steps, another ritual we had invented on the spot, because love is ever practical about making liturgy out of necessity. After the 3rd step, we did not look back immediately. Looking back too soon can break a thing you mean to keep. When I finally turned, he was already small, the scarf drawing a thin line through the afternoon like a signature on light. He did not wave. He did not need to. The hour itself raised a hand. I sat and let the ache arrive on schedule. It was punctual, dignified, interested in being thorough, but not cruel. Tears came in the way rain does when it respects crops. I tasted salt and dust, and a little oil from the pilot's camp, the world's ingredients when it decides to move you forward. The wheat blurred, then cleared, then blurred again. I did not tell my eyes to behave. I let them take dictation from the heart. When the field steadied, I tried my new instrument. The wind crossed the wheat, and the wheat answered with a note I knew exact, golden, impossible to counterfeit. It was his laughter, not a recording, a translation. The world had understood the assignment. I laughed back, and the echo made a small private weather. I was both poorer and richer than I had been that morning. This is the arithmetic of ties. Yet we still ask whether it is sensible to let love complicate our lives with duties and griefs that could have been avoided. Would it not be easier to remain untamed, to live at the clean altitude of solitude, where no hour expects you and no field changes color when you leave? If that question insists, give it an afternoon. Sit somewhere you have never sat long enough to be recognized, and then return at the same hour for a handful of days. See whether the place does not begin to keep your shape. See whether your own heart, fickle as rumor, does not become steadier for having a single appointment it refuses to betray. We are altered by what we give hours to. Indifference is cheaper, meaning is worth the cost. Evening laid its cool hand on the day. Crickets took up their silver work, sewing the edges of dark to the hem of wheat. I touched the pebble by my door and felt the stored chill of water and night. I whispered the secret to the field, not because it needed reminding, but because I did. Only with the heart. The field did not answer in words, it answered in gold. Tomorrow would come, and I would keep the hour with absence as my companion. This too is a form of presence. And when the wind behaved itself, the laugh would return, and I-fox of the wheat, friend by consent, would remember why the world is beautiful, even when it hurts. The next day arrived without him. The field, still obedient to 3 o'clock, dressed itself in gold and waited. I waited, too, sitting where the stalks thinned into our clearing. The hour came, the hour left. No small figure crossed the wheat. No scarf turned the sunlight into a flag. I had prepared myself for absence, but preparation is like an umbrella. It can shield you from the rain, never from the sound of it falling. I told myself the ritual had not been wasted. The hour still sang, only now it carried a solo instead of a duet. The wheat still leaned, the wind still combed its pages, my body still lifted at 2, loosened at 2:30, and ached at 3. Absence had become the pupil of the lesson. Taming, after all, was never a guarantee of permanence. It was an invitation to memory. I remembered our rehearsals of kindness. "Do not blame the road," I whispered. "Do not call the sky indifferent." The sky overheard me and, as if to prove its innocence, painted itself in an extravagant dusk. Streaks of fire and violet, more vivid than it had ever offered us together. I laughed, because grief is sometimes shown mercy by beauty, too excessive to ignore. I thought of his rose. Alone now on B612, watered perhaps by the echo of his hands, guarded perhaps only by her own fragile thorns. Did she feel the tug of the invisible thread we had named together? Did she cough her theatrical cough and realize it had become unnecessary? I hoped so. I hoped that in the great silence of space she had learned what the wheat had taught me, that hours, once given, never stop speaking. That evening I walked the border of the field, tracing the familiar posts. The pebble by my door glimmered faintly in moonlight, his small moon, his gift. I pressed my nose to it and caught the faintest taste of water and iron. It reminded me that gifts are not for ownership, but for remembrance. Each time I touched it, the hour rewound like a watch. The next afternoon I kept the hour again. This time the ache arrived early, impatient. At 3 the wind carried a note that made the wheat laugh. I closed my eyes and heard him clearly, his laugh exactly translated into gold. It startled me, the precision of it. For a moment I believed he was near, hidden, testing me. When I opened my eyes, only the field bowed, only the wind spoke. But that was enough. The lesson had worked. The essential had gone invisible without becoming absent. Grown-ups would ask what proof I had. They would want a chart, a recording, a measurement of decibels. They would not believe that the laugh was woven into the field. But I had the proof of recognition. When the sound reached me, my heart moved without hesitation. That is evidence enough. To ease the gravity, I practiced my ritual of nonsense. I asked the moon to file a complaint against darkness for monopolizing its hours. I asked the crickets if they kept ledgers of songs sung. They refused, claiming art should not be taxed. I even teased the wind. "You are carrying too many secrets. Drop one here." The wind obeyed, leaving me a feather, curled like a question mark. As days folded, I began to understand what he had given me beyond sorrow. Ties are not only threads that bind two creatures, they are instruments that tune the world. Before him, wheat was weather. After him, wheat was music. Before him, 3 o'clock was a number. After him, 3 o'clock was a doorway. Such transformations are irreversible. No departure can revoke them. I thought too of the pilot. Did he mend his engine fully? Did he look back at the boy and understand what had been entrusted to him? The boy had carried many questions, but he had also carried a secret sentence that now lived with me. Perhaps the pilot also held it, perhaps in a different key. The truth likes to multiply its custodians. One night, unable to sleep, I walked under stars. I looked up and wondered which one was his. The heavens, crowded with lanterns, all seemed to smile with the same mischievous authority. "He is laughing on one of you," I told them, "and I will not guess which. It would ruin the joke." They sparkled in agreement. Yet we still ask whether love that ends in absence is worth the ache. Would it not be better to remain untouched, to live in the safety of solitude, unmarked by laughter that becomes memory? If that doubt troubles you, try this. Recall a voice that once changed how you heard silence. Imagine your world without it. Is it truly safer or merely emptier? Meaning costs ache. Ache proves meaning. The exchange is old, fair, and unavoidable. When dawn returned, I sat again at 3. This time I welcomed the ache as one welcomes a guest who has decided to stay indefinitely. It sat beside me politely. Together we listened as the wheat turned sunlight into laughter. I bowed the way we had agreed. Ears high, eyes lowered, tail still. Ceremony does not end because the guest has gone. Ceremony is the rope that lets memory climb back into the room. And so the days began to teach me a new ritual. Keeping the hour with absence, letting absence be the form presence sometimes takes. It is not a lesser form. It is simply the form the world prefers when teaching us to see with the heart. The season turned by a hair, the way a clock hand slips without bragging. Mornings came cooler, evenings learned a violet the field had not bothered to memorize before. I kept our hour, and our hour kept me. Absence and I grew civil. We shared the bench of 3 o'clock like old neighbors who exchange the weather and a story saved for just that landing of the sun. News arrived the way true news does, without messengers, carried by a pattern that has learned your address. The wind came from the far rim of the plain with a taste of night water and iron, as if it had rolled a bucket across stars. I knew then, with the knowledge of paws rather than books, that the boy and the pilot had found a well. He had told me of such a thing, how once, under a sky combed with constellations, they walked until a pulley squeaked like a weather vane in the wind, and the rope burned a kind ache into their hands, and the bucket rose with a singing so honest it made the water taste of the walk under the stars, the song of the pulley. The effort of your arms. Grown-ups would call it hydration. He called it a gift. I could not see the well from my clearing, but I could hear the world adopt its key. The wheat hushed as if in church. A lark tried a descant and then stepped back to let the bucket's memory be the soloist. Even the willow, which usually keeps its own counsel, lifted one branch as though to bless a sacrament it recognized. Necessity made beautiful by attention. I thought of my own old watering places, a ditch that remembered rain, a trough where farmers let buckets kiss the surface twice before lifting. Water is shy with the hasty. I imagined the boy cupping his hands, the pilot tilting the bucket. The first mouthful startling both of them with the truth that usefulness and wonder are cousins who often arrive together when invited properly. What makes a desert beautiful, he had once said, is that it hides a well. I had rolled that sentence around like a berry, storing its sugar. Now the field tasted it too. To keep grief from presuming command, I entertained the nonsense that had become part of my diet. I asked the clouds to file an itinerary so the wheat could plan its hairstyles. I warned the scarecrow he was overqualified for his post and should apply for cathedral work. He replied by leaning slightly more pious. I told a beetle that his path was inefficient. He told me by refusing to answer that I had mistaken wandering for waste. The hour opened, and with it my memory of the boy's questions when our lessons were still made of presents. "Why does the same water taste different at night?" he had asked, and I had said something about the tongue being a better theologian when stars are out. "And why does the bucket sing?" Because I had guessed, anything that travels from depth to mouth wants to announce itself. He had considered both answers as one might weigh two small coins whose value is sentimental rather than minted. I pictured the pilot hand's raw eyes, red with wakefulness, learning from a child the old liturgy of drawing up sustenance, as if it were a secret, gladly told. It comforted me that the man of metal kept company with a sound older than engines. The creak of rope, the soft clap of water against wood. If you have only heard machines work, you might mistake their confidence for benevolence. A pulley reminds you that effort can sing without threat. Grown-ups, if they had been present, would have asked for the well's coordinates, the bucket's volume, the exact rate of evaporation in a desert midnight. I would not scorn such numbers. Geometry can be a form of reverence, but I would have asked a different thing. At what point between sand and lip did gratitude begin? The boy would have known. Gratitude begins where repetition becomes recognition. At 3, with the wind still carrying that faint sweetness, I practiced the sentence that had become my job to keep polished. But only the heart. The eyes miss the bucket's song. The eyes miss how the rope dignifies the hand that pulls. The eyes count miles. The heart counts steps taken together under a cold sky. I repeated the rule, not as a spell against sorrow, but as a way to keep tools bright. A grasshopper, appointed by no one, served as our usher. He clicked once, twice, and I announced to the field, as if the wheat had not already guessed, "They have found water." The wheat, which prefers proof to theories, approved by deepening its gold. The pebble by my door kept its moon cool. The ribbon we once agreed would hang in case of absence lifted slightly in a breeze, though no absence required explanation that day. Absence and I were simply keeping the hour like honest clerks. Yet we still ask whether wells are worth the walking, whether the slow work of attention pays for itself in a world that sells faster satisfactions in tidy bottles. Is it naive to believe that the taste of effort improves the drink? Wouldn't it be simpler to save the 53 minutes and take a pill, as the merchant promised? If such temptation finds you, give yourself a single errand that refuses efficiency. Stir the soup slowly. Write the letter by hand. Walk to the far fountain instead of the near tap. Notice how the act becomes the seasoning. Notice how, without scolding, patience alters flavor. Then decide whether speed alone is worthy of your praise. I imagined, too, another creature at the rim of that night, the snake, spare and ceremonial, speaking in riddles as snakes must to keep their dignity. The boy had told me about him in that bright, matter-of-fact tone children reserve for the frightening things they have already tamed with names. He says he can send me back, the boy had reported, quick as sleep. I dislike shortcuts. Doors exist for reasons. But I also know how travelers measure homesickness, in stars, in tears, in the number of times they utter a single flower's name to correct the compass of their mouth. I hoped the pilot had stood near. The way one stands near a door without forcing it shut, close enough to keep the weather off, far enough to respect the private treaties hearts make with stars. To loosen this knot of thought, I resumed our comedy routine in his absence. "Wind," I said, You will one day be audited for the laughter you have misplaced." It rustled in apology and returned him to me in a gold cord from the west. "Crickets," I warned. "I expect an itemized account of tonight's hymns." They answered with more music, which is the only honest receipt art ever gives. "Moon," I added, "you are showing off." The moon accepted the charge with serenity. It has tenure. I remembered one more detail from his tale of the well, how the pilot had lifted the bucket and the boy had drunk with eyes closed, the better to see. That is how the heart works when it trusts. It dimmed lesser senses to let the essential come forward. Perhaps that is why partings happen at dusk so often. The world's edges soften, and what matters steps nearer without glare. Toward the end of our hour, a child from the village Sticky with jam, alarmingly fearless, wandered to the fence and stared at me as if I were a bedtime story that had escaped its binding. "Are you the fox?" he asked, because children enjoy identities plain. "Sometimes," I said. He considered this and offered me a crumb through the wire. I took it and offered him a rule. When someone promises to meet you at the same hour, keep it as you would keep water. He nodded the way wheat nods and ran back toward a voice calling his name. Advice, like seeds, travels best in small pockets. The day cooled, the bucket's imagined squeak faded into a kind of blessing that requires no sound. I bowed to the field, to the pebble, to the ribbon, to the hour that had borne so much learning without complaint. "Tomorrow," I told the silence, and the silence agreed. It has learned to answer when spoken to gently. I slept and dreamed, not of the snake's quick door, nor of engines that pretend their thunder is wisdom, but of a rope, a pulley, a star-dusted walk, a child's hands, and a cup raised without ceremony because thirst does not require applause. In the dream, the water tasted like all the afternoons we had sat together, clarified into something you could swallow. I woke with the pleasant fatigue of creatures who have pulled a bucket up a long way and found it full. The announcement came without trumpets, the way seasons declare themselves by changing the smell of morning. The pilot's engine coughed, then arranged its breath into a steady line. From my clearing, I heard nothing so literal, only the field's attention shift, as if the wheat had decided to memorize a different rhythm. I knew what that meant. Repairs, like forgiveness, sometimes succeed. When the boy came that afternoon, he carried a quiet more exact than any tool. He sat, palms open, as if to show me he had not brought bargaining chips. "Tomorrow," he said, and the word behaved like a door no one could see. I did not press for details. Children and foxes understand that a secret loses one of its wings when handled too much. We spoke instead of small custodianship. He told me he had asked the pilot to draw a leather strap for the muzzle so the sheep won't touch the flour. He frowned with the same precision he used when counting sunsets. "It must be strong," he said, "but not cruel." I approved of the specification. Responsibility is not a fence. It is a gate that remembers both to close and to open. He looked relieved. Grown-ups like to make rules that do only one thing. He asked about the snake again, not with fascination, but with the sober practicality of someone confirming a timetable. He says, "It will be quick," the boy murmured, more to the wheat than to me. I do not like the snake's kind of quick. I prefer slow doors, with hinges you can oil and time to reconsider before stepping through. Still, I respected the symmetry of a creature who offers passage without paperwork. To keep fear from becoming the loudest guest, we admitted our bait of silliness. He wondered out loud if planets keep visitor logs. I suggested they stamp passports with constellations. He proposed issuing a permit for Tierce Limited, renewable, transferable to wheat. I provided the seal, a fox's whisker scratched into air. We both grinned, and the grin gave the hour enough room to breathe. The light moved across the field like a hand closing softly. He traced our clearing with his eyes, as you do when you are trying to carry a place inside your head. "I will look as if I'm ill," he said at last, with the careful courage of someone doing a kindness to the friend he is leaving. "You must not come." The sentence sat between us like a difficult loaf, nutritious, dense. He explained more, that bodies can mislead, that the important part would be elsewhere, that flesh sometimes performs theatre when the heart is doing honest work. I understood. Creatures who live by sign learn to mistrust certain signals. Pain can be a curtain. Meaning often stands behind it, steady. He pressed his hand into the wheat and listened to what it said back. I thought of the day in the garden when he had told the roses they were ordinary to him because he had not given them hours. The reverse was also true. This place would never be ordinary to him again, because he had given it a season of careful attention. The hour had shaped his seeing. Now his seeing would keep the hour alive where no clock could reach. "Tell me what I should remember," he asked, not petitioning for a speech, just for a tool. I gave him the simplest blade I had. Choose a time, choose a place. Keep it for what you love. When doubt arrives, let the appointment answer. He repeated it exactly, as if signing a contract. Then he asked, a little mischievous, "And what should I forget?" "Forget," I said, "your hope that meaning can be had without cost." He laughed softly because the advice sounded like a riddle and a receipt. We rehearsed kindness one last time. "We will not accuse the sky," I reminded him. "It is impartial to everyone and still behaves beautifully." He nodded. "We will not make the road the villain." Another nod. "We will not call the hours wasted." Here he smiled, fiercely. "Never," he said. The wheat, overhearing, stood taller. Grown-ups would have demanded coordinates, schedules, assurances that this was not madness dressed up as metaphor. They would have packed the moment with supervision, safety rails, signatures, witnesses with clipboards. But the desert teaches a different bureaucracy. If the heart has decided, forms become irrelevant. You walk to where the stars and your feet agree, and you trust that what looks like an ending is often a door placed sideways. He rose and straightened his scarf, then immediately mussed it, dissatisfied with tidiness at a time like this. "I will miss 3 o'clock, he confessed, and the confession did not weaken him. It made him honest. 3 o'clock will not miss you, I said gently. It will keep itself. That is the generosity of rituals, listen. He liked that his face did the small lifting it does when a sentence moves furniture inside him to make better space. We built ourselves a last scaffold of nonsense. He asked whether foxes issue rain checks to stars. I argued that stars do not accept IOUs. They demand punctual wonder. He insisted that if the moon were responsible, it would publish a schedule of eclipses for sentimental planning. I assured him it already had, and that only grown-ups turn such calendars into tests. We laughed until the lark complained about the noise and then laughed at our apology. As the sun tilted to its private appointment, he grew solemn again. "If you hear crying," he said, "do not be afraid. I promise to distinguish between the body's honesty and the heart's agreement. It is a hard skill, but the field had been teaching us." I told him I would keep the pebble by the door and the ribbon for the days when absence required an explanation. He approved with the gravity of a small king whose kingdom is 1 hour wide and infinitely deep. That night, the plain learned secrecy. The stars sharpened. Somewhere beyond my sight line, a voice that speaks in hissed riddles, waited with the politeness of inevitability. I did not follow. I did what he asked. I kept the hour empty, the way a chair is kept for the person you expect, even when you know the train has passed. The wind crossed the wheat and produced, with unflinching accuracy, the note that contained his laugh. I held it to my chest the way one holds a field guide when lost, not as magic, but as instruction. I will not dress what followed in silk. The body is an animal, and animals protest. Somewhere in the dark a small weight fell quietly, and the earth, which keeps even our best vows, did its old work. I waited with my forehead in the wheat until the ache found its proper shape. When it did, I recognized it not as scandal, but as consequence. We had chosen a thread. Threads tie and they tug. They also teach. At dawn, the world was as indecently beautiful as ever. Birds resumed their bureaucracy of song. The willow shook out the night like a cloak. The field put on its golden manners. And there, as promised, the door of 3 o'clock was already ajar, patient, professional, ready for its new employment. To meet me with his laughter in the language of wind. Yet we still ask whether any of this is sensible. To trust an invisible tie more than a visible body, to believe that a star can be a bell, that a field can become an instrument, that a friendship can keep working after one chair, is empty. Are we consoling ourselves with poetry when we should be worshipping facts? Try a modest experiment. Close your eyes in front of something you love, a face, a tree, a cup repaired twice, and ask what remains. If the answer has weight, temperature, responsibility, and a timetable, then you have met the essential. Eyes are archivists, hearts are judges. I went to my burrow and touched the pebble by the door. Night still lived in it. I whispered the sentence he had taken with him, and I had kept. Only with the heart. It is embarrassing how often we must relearn it. The pebble did not answer. The wheat did, with a sound that was not words, and was all the words I needed. Tomorrow would come, and with it the precise geography of our appointment. I would be there. He would be elsewhere. And also, by the covenant we made, exactly on time. Morning folded itself into noon, and noon into the soft corridor that leads to 3. By then I was already waiting. Habit, once honest, feels like devotion. The boy did not come, yet the hour did, punctual as always. Absence sat beside me with the politeness of an old friend who knows when not to talk. I listened. The field answered first. The wheat leaned forward and whispered his laugh in gold. It was startling, not because it was loud, but because it was precise. A note carried faithfully across silence. I closed my eyes and for a breath believed he was just behind me, ready to tug my ear with some impossible question. When I opened them, only the clearing waited, but the laugh lingered. Memory is a more durable presence than appearance. That day I began the new ritual, keeping 3 o'clock as a conversation with what is invisible. I learned that absence still provides dialogue if you come faithfully. It offers recollections, small corrections, a syllabus of gratitude. When I faltered, the field reminded me, hours given never vanish. They simply change their wardrobe. I tried speaking aloud to him. Your rose is still safe, I said, though I had no way of knowing. But the heart often knows what the eyes cannot prove. I pictured her coughing less, demanding less, trusting more because hours had trained him to be faithful and therefore able to return, whether by body or by memory. Responsibility was now his native tongue. To distract myself from the ache, I practiced our old liturgy of nonsense. I scolded the lark for singing off key. It insisted it was inventing jazz. I told the willow it should apply for work as a curtain in a theatre. It swayed in audition. I asked the crickets for a receipt of their songs. They gave me more music instead. These games, absurd as feathers in soup, held me upright. They were proof that joy, like grief, can be practiced until it becomes muscle. At dusk the stars lit their innumerable candles. I looked at them as if scanning a choir for a single voice. Which was his? I would never know. That was the gift. If every star might be his, then the entire sky had been recruited into companionship. Laugh again, I asked quietly. One winked, another shimmered. The heart recognized him in all of them. The eyes, as usual, were too literal. I remembered our rehearsals of kindness, and I kept them. I did not curse the road. I did not accuse the sky. I did not call the hours wasted. Instead, I told the night, "You are the frame for our picture." The night accepted the compliment and deepened into velvet. Still, there was ache. Ache does not dissolve. It learns manners. It arrives punctually, sits down and behaves itself beside joy. The two of them, Ache and Joy, became my companions, like mismatched twins who share one chair. I no longer tried to evict either. Both were evidence that love had done its work, yet we still ask whether rituals kept with absence can nourish the soul as much as rituals kept with presence. Is it foolish to sit at 3 when no one comes? Does it not make us look mad, waiting for footsteps that never press the path again? Try it yourself before you judge. Keep one small appointment with someone gone. Speak to the chair, water the plant, pour the cup. See whether your own heart does not shift from emptiness to dialogue. Madness is measured by indifference, not by devotion. The days multiplied. Each one polished the secret he left me until it gleamed so brightly I sometimes had to look away. What is essential is invisible to the eyes. I saw it everywhere, in the way the wheat moved, not just as crop, but as instrument, in the way the pebble by my door glowed like a modest moon, in the way the stars winked their identical eyes, yet taught me to hear laughter in every repetition. I realized that this was his final gift, to train me to become a custodian of invisibility, to hold what could not be measured and keep it alive with practice. Foxes live by signs. Now I lived by secrets too. Both are honest languages if you are patient. At the close of one such day, I bowed toward the field, as we had always done. Ceremony was our insurance against forgetting. Tomorrow, I whispered, though I knew absence would arrive again. But tomorrow was not a wager, it was a vow. And vows, even whispered, have the authority of suns. The ache softened, the laugh lingered, the sky spread itself generous. 3 o'clock had become eternal. The village learned our hour before it learned my name. It noticed a fox who sat at 3, ears forward, tail still, as if auditioning for a statue that breathes. Children, being kin to wonder, came first. They stood at the fence and stared without malice. One girl brought me a crust and placed it on a post as if feeding a shrine. I did not eat. Instead, I bowed a small ceremony to teach her that some offerings are received with the eyes. She bowed back, delighted to have invented a ritual with a creature who did not speak her grammar. News travelled the slow way by repetition. The miller said he'd seen a fox that kept office hours. The baker wondered aloud if I'd been hired by the wheat to ensure punctual wind. A hunter, to his credit, hung his gun on a peg and observed me for several afternoons, perhaps suspecting that an animal with appointments should be treated as a clerk rather than quarry. On Thursdays he still danced with the village girls. I maintained the old law for my kind. Some habits deserve to survive their reasons. It surprised me how quickly the hour began to educate more than just my chest. The field learned patience and gave it back as shade. The willow rehearsed kindness until its branches made a room that improved the truth you told inside it. Even the lark, usually arrogant with altitude, landed more often to listen, as if humility were an instrument it meant to practice. The world, I found, is teachable when watched with love long enough. I became, reluctantly at first, a teacher, not of speeches foxes are poor lecturers, but of rituals. I showed a pair of children how to send a sign if they could not come, a blue ribbon on a stalk. The first time they used it, absence arrived without panic. Responsibility had sent a postcard ahead. I taught an old man, widowed into a house that echoed, to keep a chair by the window at the same hour each day. He began to talk softly to the empty street. After a week, the street started answering in small ways. A cat that timed its patrol, a neighbor who waved, a cloud that remembered to pause. "It is not much," he told me. "No," I agreed, "it is everything." Grown-ups, encountering patience, instinctively reach for measuring tapes. A clerk with spectacles came to catalogue me for some provincial report. Species, habits, threat level, economic impact. He ticked his boxes while I sat in the clearing and refused to fit his columns. "Productivity?" he asked the wheat. The wheat declined to answer. "Output?" he asked the hour. The hour offered a door. He left puzzled, having met a phenomenon that would not translate into profit, and therefore persisted in being real. I kept the boy's gifts polished. The pebble by my door, with its little moon of cool, the bell jar's ring of light, when the sun leaned right, the sentence that turns eyes into apprentices of the heart. At 3 each day, the wind performed its faithful translation as laugh, exact and golden. Sometimes it arrived with a new harmony, as if a star had joined in. I learned to identify a few constellations by timbre rather than by map. This is not astronomy, it is gratitude with ears. On certain afternoons I felt the ache sharpen, sudden as a hawk's shadow. It passed, but not before teaching me something practical. Ache, if welcomed, becomes a hinge. Doors open on it. I opened to the village when it came timidly with questions. "Were you tamed?" a boy asked, proud to use our word. "Yes," I said. "Does it last, if you keep the hour?" He nodded, solemn as a judge. "Then it lasts." I thought often of the pilot. In the dark blue beyond wheat and roofs, a man of metal had learned to draw water with a rope that sang. I imagined his engine lifting him like a promise kept, then setting him down again among people who would demand coordinates and fail to taste the desert's hidden sweetness. I hoped he carried the same sentence we shared, even if he called it by another name. In a world supervised by dashboards, it is useful to own a compass that points toward the invisible. Once at dusk, a thin figure stood at the field's far edge, too far to identify, close enough to shift my breath. He did not approach. He bowed in the small way of people who have loved something they cannot prove. Then he was gone, and the sky refused to provide minutes as evidence. I took it as a kindness. Some recognitions are better left unmeasured. To keep the hour from collapsing into shrine, I irrigated it with play. I accused the moon of plagiarizing riverlight. The moon pled guilty with style. I told the scarecrow he was promoted to guardian of ceremonies. He sagged with responsibility. A child asked whether a fox can write letters. Yes, I said, but I mail them in wind. She returned the next day to report that she had heard mine. It is a comfort when the world accepts your metaphors as legal tender. Still, the village's pragmatists pressed questions. What good is an hour that pays in feelings, they asked. Can you eat a ritual? Will a memory keep you warm in winter? I did not argue. I led them to the willow and sat in the small room we had taught its branches to be. Then I kept 3 o'clock while they watched. The wheat turned gold in that particular key. The wind polite, professional delivered the laugh. The clerk with spectacles took off his glasses. The hunter, without meaning to, bowed. No one ate, everyone was fed. Yet we still ask whether devotion to what cannot be weighed is luxury, a pastime for poets and children while the world groans under real burdens. Are hours given to a field and a memory stolen from work, or are they the work without which all other labor makes no sense? Try the experiment I gave the widower. Choose one honest hour. Keep it in one honest place. Let no screen appoint its meaning. Repeat until the chair remembers your weight and the window knows your name. Then return to your tasks. See whether the tasks have not become obedient to a purpose that finally has a face. Toward the end of that season, I walked the posts and counted not the way accountants do, but the way lovers inventory proofs. 3rd fence post, our boundary, the willow, our room, the clearing, our nave, the pebble, our little moon, the ribbon, our treaty with absence. I added one more, a narrow path the children had worn coming to watch a fox keep an hour. Paths like sentences are ties made visible. On the last day before the weather broke into serious cold, the field delivered a new sound, a distant, high, almost bell that threaded itself through the laugh I knew. I looked up. The sky had scattered its lamps extravagantly, and for a moment every star felt close enough to set on a table. I remembered his boast that if you love a flower on a star, it is sweet at night to look at the sky, all the stars in bloom. I am not given to boasts, but I allowed myself that one. The firmament had become a garden, and laughter was the wind that kept it from going still. The village, catching the mood without needing the reasons, slowed. Lanterns were lit earlier, voices dropped a note. Someone, I never learned who, set a small bowl of water under the willow for travellers. It filled at once with reflected stars. A child asked if foxes drink constellations. Only when thirsty for courage, I said, and the child nodded as if this matched prior research. I felt part 15 gathering. The way one feels a good ending test its weight before stepping onto the page. Endings, to be kind, must walk softly. I prepared myself the way creatures do. I made the bed of the hour neat. I trimmed my expectations to what the world could honestly keep. I practiced saying the secret without ornament. I asked the wind to carry laughter accurately and the wheat to sing in tune. They agreed, professionals to the last. Before sleep, I went to the burrow door, touched the pebble, and told it the day. Children, clerk, hunter, willow, path, bowl of stars. The pebble accepted the report in silence, as pebbles do when promoted to memory's office. Tomorrow, I said to the field, we will close this story like a book that hopes to be reopened. The field rustled assent. Yet we still ask whether closure is a polite fiction, whether stories truly end or only pause, where breath demands. I suspect the latter, but pauses are sacred. They let the heart catch up to its own learning. They let the world reshelve its light. So I slept, the hour folded neatly under my pillow. Morning would come, and with it the soft labor of saying the last things first. The wheat would dress itself in gold one more time for a long bow. The wind would tune, the stars unembarrassed would keep laughing, and the fox of the wheat, clerk of 3 o'clock, custodian of the invisible, would say goodbye the only way that keeps anything, by keeping the hour. The morning came, dressed for a small ceremony. Frost filigreed the fence wires, the willow's thin hands wore glass gloves. Even the scarecrow, promoted to guardian of ceremonies, stood straighter, as if stitched with fresh authority. I walked the posts and recited our inventor not as an audit, but as a litany. Third fence post, boundary we honoured, ribbon, treaty with absence, clearing, our nave, willow, our room, pebble by the door, little moon, bell jar, ring of light, for pride made gentle, the wind's instrument, wheat, the hour, doorway. The field hummed agreement. It had learned its role and accepted the bow. At 3, I took my place. The world arrived on time. Light placed its hand on the stalks in that exact way it learned from him. The wheat lifted and sang his laugh, faithful, golden, with a faint second harmony that might have been a star. I closed my eyes and listened, the way one listens to a name spoken from the next room. When I opened them, absence was beside me like an honest companion who keeps the silence because words would perform instead of serve. I had brought a gift. Foxes keep few possessions and fewer speeches, but we do keep promises. From last night's path, I had collected a single straw of wheat, straight and sound. I laid it across the pebble as a bridge between the well's cool and the field's gold water to laughter, necessity to joy. If altars must be simple to be true, ours was true. Visitors came in ones and twos as the hour opened its door. The hunter without his gun, hat respectful in both hands. The clerk, spectacles tucked away, as if numbers should remove their shoes before entering. Children, wide-eyed, whispering the way one whispers to keep from frightening beauty. They stood at the fence, did not call my name, did not toss crusts. They had learned some offerings are given by not disturbing the air. We kept the ritual as if reading from a book we had written together. I bowed. The wheat sang, the wind carried, professional to the last. I spoke softly for the visitors, just enough for their hearts to take dictation. Choose a time. Choose a place. Keep it for what you love. When doubt arrives, let the appointment answer. A child repeated it to herself like steps to cross a stream. I told them a small story to place in their pockets. A boy, from a star, learned that a garden of roses could look like his own, and still only one would be his because of hours given, weather shared, the ridiculous patience of screens and watering cans, quarrels forgiven, pride translated. I did not name the snake or the leaving. I named only the thread. Threads dislike publicity. They thrive on practice. The clerk raised a careful hand, and, "If the world is busy?" he asked, not to scold, but to confess a difficulty. "Then busy must learn our hour," I said. "The sun keeps its appointment daily." The lamplighter kept his despite logic. Wells sing for those who arrive with rope and time. He nodded, as if a room inside his ribs had finally found its furniture. The hunter asked whether grief ever ends. "Grief is seasonal," I said. "Winter teaches roots to remember water." He glanced at the small bowl beneath the willow where someone, perhaps that widower, had again set a shallow dish to catch whatever heavens would lend. A net of constellations trembled in it. He bowed, without noticing he had. A girl pressed a blue ribbon between fence wires. "For when I can't come," she whispered to the hour. The ribbon understood. Absent does not mean faithless, it means faithful in another tense. When the visitors left, the field softened. We had one more task, to close without extinguishing. Endings, if done kindly, behave like shutters dimming glare, so the essential can be seen. I spoke to the hour aloud, as we had agreed on the days before words were heavy. "You have a new employment now to meet me with laughter, and to teach whoever sits where I sit how to read the invisible." The hour accepted. Professionals appreciate clarity. I turned, finally, to the place where his footsteps used to begin. I could have begged the sky for a sign, but the sky is a poor correspondent. It answers only with beauty, which is generous and imprecise. I bowed instead to the posts, to the willow, to the honest ground. Then I said the sentence once more, not to impress, but to ensure the tools were oiled. It is only with the heart that one sees clearly. What is essential is invisible to the eyes. The field placed the words where they belonged, on the wind, inside the wheat, along the path the children had worn, in the pocket of each spectator's coat. We may still wonder whether such sentences are practical against the strict arithmetic of days. Rent, chores, illness, headlines that behave like weather without forecasts. Can a vow kept with an hour survive machinery, markets, and the cold insistence of clocks? Are we not dressing need in poetry when need prefers ales and lumber? Here is the question I leave you with, the one the boy left me with, though he never phrased it so. What grows in a life that keeps even one appointment with love? Try it when no one is scoring you. Keep a chair by a window for someone gone, pour 2 cups and drink one, learn a street's mood by walking it without haste. Guard a single ritual the way a lamplighter protects his small flame, then ask again which labor is frivolous and which is foundation. Evening approached on soft feet. The children returned with lanterns and, uncoached, hung them on the fence like low stars. The clerk stood a little apart, not making notes, simply watching the way light reasons with darkness. The hunter whistled once to the lark, and the lark, surprised by diplomacy, answered. I stayed until the hour faded into the next honest thing. The wheat relaxed from choir to crop. The wind, work finished, became merely generous. I lifted the straw from the pebble and tucked it beneath my paw. A small keepsake is easier to carry than a field, but it contains the field if you keep the hour. The first snow came lightly in the night, not to erase, but to remember more quietly. I slept and dreamed the dream that has now replaced all other dreams. A rope, a pulley, a walk at star o'clock, a cup raised without ceremony. In the dream he laughed, and the laugh was the same note the wheat plays when the wind behaves. In the weeks that followed, I kept 3 o'clock with a steadiness that made even winter consider kindness. The village learned to time its gentlest errands near that hour. A widow folded a shawl more slowly. A baker set a small loaf on the sill to let the crust listen. The clerk, spectacles on again, drew a private map. Not of rivers and roads, but of chairs and windows where people kept appointments with the absent. It looked from a distance, like a constellation. And when spring happened, because spring always happens to those who endure winter politely, the field rose green and then gold again. Children grew taller, the ribbon faded to the color of faraway water. The willow's room enlarged enough to seat a new shyness. The bowl beneath it filled with rain that had borrowed starlight. The pebble kept its cool moon. The bell jar's ring of light returned on certain afternoons to remind the proud to be gentle. The laugh came on time. The hour kept itself. You ask whether this story ends. I answer with the truth fields prefer. Stories pause. A harvest is not a finish, it is a transfer from stalk to hand to bread, from bread to breath, from breath to vow. What the boy gave me I hand to you, not by law, not by lecture, but by hour. Choose one, keep it, let it teach you to see with what does not blink. Now the soft closing. Tonight the sky will lift its 1,000 small chalices. Somewhere among them, laughter. The wind will carry it if you ask politely. Sit where you are, by a window, by a bed, on a step that knows your weight, and make an appointment with the invisible. Do not chase a sign beyond your strength. A simple pledge will do. Here, at this time, I belong to what I love. Let the chair warm with your waiting. Let your hands be still enough that a thread can tie them without fear of being dropped. If sorrow sits with you, give it a corner and a cup. It has travelled far to be honest in your presence. If joy arrives unannounced, do not apologize for your tears. They are siblings, both fluent in truth. Listen. Perhaps a memory will cross the room like a small figure with a gold scarf. Tug your ear with an impossible question and then sit as he used to, with his palms on his knees to keep them from fidgeting. Perhaps nothing will move, the hour will move you instead. You will learn the texture of silence when it decides to be companion. You will hear the rope's old song in the ordinary work of drawing water for supper. You will watch the wheat, whatever your wheat is, turn sunlight into a note you recognize as yours. And when the day is finished, bow wears forward, eyes lowered, tail still to the field of your life. Thank it for learning your name. Whisper the sentence because tools must be kept bright, only with the heart. Then leave the chair as you found it, slightly warmer, therefore kinder, and let the world continue its unembarrassed task of being beautiful. I will be here at 3. You will be there at your hour. Between us, wind. Between us, laughter. Between us, the invisible that tells the truth more gently than sight can manage. Take it with you, keep it well. If you forget, come back. Fields forgive quickly. If you remember, teach someone the ribbon, the willow room, little moon of a pebble, the door that a number can be, the story pauses, the thread holds.